Yo, what's up guys? Alpha, and today I'm going to be doing a new installment in the Under the Meta series, but I go over a deck I've built recently that I definitely think is strong and has a lot of potential, but isn't quite tier 1 for whatever reason. Going over the card choices and the strengths and weaknesses of the deck, talking about where the deck falls short and how it can be improved in future, and then we'll have some gameplay at the end so you guys can see the deck in action too. And in this episode I'm going to be going over Temur Phoenix in Historic, and I've been doing pretty well with this deck. So when I first started playing this deck, I went 11-2 and actually managed to hit rank 1 on the ladder with it, but so I was kind of tempted to just do a regular deck guide on this as I normally do, but having played with the deck some more, there are definitely some issues and some weaknesses with the deck that have cropped up more often, so I felt like it was more appropriate to cover it under the Meta series. So this deck in general, you know, Arclight Phoenix decks have been around in Historic for quite a while now. If you're unfamiliar, basically this deck is built around Arclight Phoenix, 4 mana 3/2 with haste, which is fine to hardcast in certain scenarios, but we're mainly interested in getting this in the graveyard, and once it's in the graveyard, if we cast 3 or more instants or sorceries before our combat step, we get to bring it back from the graveyard, so we can just keep looping it over and over again to either pressure the opponent or as a blocker if we're behind on board. Now, the big strength of Phoenix in the metagame right now is it's kind of similar to Is It Wizards, but it's much less vulnerable to single target removal. You know, the big weakness of Is It Wizards is that if you queue into a deck like Rakdos Midrange or the Trap Finder decks, and they use a bunch of early single target removal to kill your creatures, your deck kind of grinds to a halt, whereas since Phoenix can be recurred from the graveyard over and over again, it trades pretty favourably with single target removal. So in an interactive metagame, Phoenix is definitely the better deck out of the two. And the big innovation with this particular list over the regular Arclight Phoenix decks is that we're splashing green for Perilous Iteration. So this is a new sorcery from the latest Alchemy set. 2 mana, and you get to seek a card of mana value 2 or less, and a card of mana value 3 or greater. Discard those cards at the beginning of your next turn's end step. So this is kind of meant to be kind of a green spin on Expressive Iteration. You know, you get 2 cards at random from your deck, and then if you don't use them by the end of your next turn, you discard them. However, you can actually use this as a tutor if you build your deck in a particular way. So if we look at this deck, Arclight Phoenix is the only card in the deck that costs 3 or more. So every time we cast Perilous Iteration, we're guaranteed to tutor Arclight Phoenix, which is really powerful because, you know, guaranteeing an Arclight Phoenix means that we can then set up turns where we discard it to a Shredder, a Faithless Looting or a Lightning Axe to then bring it back and get value off it. But on top of that, not only do we get to tutor the Phoenix, if we don't have a way to discard it, it automatically discards to the Perilous Iteration at the beginning of your next turn's end step anyway. So even if we don't have a discard outlet for the Phoenix, it automatically gets pitched so that it's in the graveyard for us to bring back later in the game, which is really powerful. Then additionally, we obviously get a card with mana value 2 or less as well. So you know, the annoying thing about this card, normally if you don't build around it, is you typically don't want to be casting this on turn 2 because you won't be able to cast both the spells you get. But if we're happy to just pitch the Phoenix, this basically just guarantees Phoenix into the yard and then finds another card for us to either cast or like a land or something. So I think this card works really, really well in the deck. The fact it's also 2 mana is nice as well because we can cast this on turn 2, tutor up a Phoenix, and then we have a Phoenix in hand going into our turn 3 where we can cast 3 spells and pitch it to something like a Faithless Looting or a Lightning Axe to be able to bring it back. So I think Perilous Iteration works really, really nicely with Arclight Phoenix, and I think this is a cool way that you can potentially build the deck. In terms of the other cards in the deck, you know, a lot of stock stuff here from the Is It Phoenix list. We've got consider 4 ops, which are just generically good cantrips. The only real consideration over ops could potentially be Abundant Harvest because we're splashing green. Now, the issue with Abundant Harvest in this particular deck is that, you know, the mana base is one of the weaknesses of the deck. I'm going to talk about this after I've explained the card choices in general, but the nice thing about this particular build without Abundant Harvest is that we only need green on turn 2, so there's slightly less pressure on the mana base. If one of your 1 mana cantrips is green, then I think you need to start running more green sources, and then you're going to run into more issues where it's just slightly less consistent. Now, in a vacuum, I do think Abundant Harvest is probably a better card than Opt in this shell, but it just makes the deck less consistent in terms of the mana, so I'm not a big fan of it. So I think Opt, just in terms of consistency, is better. Then we've obviously got Faithless Looting, just a staple in the Phoenix decks. Very nice with Perilous Iteration because we can tutor the Arclight Phoenix a lot more consistently. Fiery Impulse is a new card for the latest Explorer Anthology, and this is kind of replacing Unholy Heat. I think this is better than Unholy Heat right now because it's so much easier to get 2 or more instants or sorceries in your graveyard than it is to get Delirium online, especially because we're not running a 5th card type. You know, we've only got creature, instant, sorcery, land in the main deck anyway, so getting Delirium online does take a little while, whereas it's very easy to get Fiery Impulse online. And right now in Historic, there aren't too many creatures with 4 toughness where the difference in damage is really going to matter. You know, most things that you want to be able to kill are 3 toughness, so the difference between 3 and 4 isn't really that big in Historic right now. Now, the other big weakness of Fiery Impulse over Unholy Heat is that this can't kill Planeswalkers, but from my experience, control isn't a huge portion of the metagame right now. If things change and more 4 toughness creatures do start cropping up, or Planeswalkers start cropping up, then I could see Unholy Heat being better, but right now, I definitely think I prefer Fiery Impulse, just because it's so much easier to get Spell Mastery online than it is to get Delirium online. And we've also got Lightning Axe, so I'm not a huge fan of this card in general, but I think you kind of need to be running it right now because it's the only way that we can deal with stuff like Shieldred. Shieldred is commonly running Rakdos mid-range and is basically impossible for Phoenix to beat if it sticks around on the battlefield, so having Lightning Axe as a way to kill that is really huge. And then, like I said, there are some creatures in the format that have 4 or more toughness, stuff like Righteous Valkyrie against Angels, for example, so having Lightning Axe as an out to that is pretty important. And additionally, I do think Lightning Axe is better in this particular build than it is in regular. Is it because we have Perilous Iteration, which can consistently tutor the Arclight Phoenix, so because of that, having Lightning Axe as an additional way to discard it is really nice as well. So Lightning Axe I just think is important, whilst Shieldred is a part of the format. Then Legishredder, there are a lot of different options you can run in the creature suite for Phoenix. There's Sprite Dragon, Balmor. Obviously, in this build, we can't run the more expensive cards like Crackling Drake or Storming Entity because it interferes with the Perilous Iteration, but Legishredder I definitely think is better in this particular build. Now, if you're running regular Izzet, I'm not sure you need to be maxing out on 4 Shredder. I'd probably be playing 3 if I was playing regular Izzet, but I really like Legishredder in this particular build because it works really nicely with Perilous Iteration. If you have a Shredder in play, you can cast Perilous Iteration as your first spell, which guarantees you finding an Arclight Phoenix. Then if you cast your second spell, that will trigger the Legishredder, which then allows you to discard the Phoenix that you just tutored up. So I really like Shredder in this particular build because it works really, really nicely with Perilous Iteration. And then, I do think having something like a Shredder, a Sprite Dragon, or a Balmor is very important because otherwise the deck is just too vulnerable to Graveyard Hate. Legishredder gives you a way to beat Graveyard Hate, which is very nice. And then we've also got Expressive Iteration, so this is obviously one of the best cards in the deck, one of the best cards in the format in general. Really, really sick at just allowing you to grind better into the longer games, helping you find what you need, helping you dig for lands or whatever else you need. Expressive Iteration, if you've played with this card, you probably know how powerful it is. And then we also get Gigantha as the companion, which is pretty nice. Regular Phoenix doesn't normally get to run Gigantha because they're either running Oxyvagonus or Finale of Promise. Obviously, we can't run Oxyvagonus because it interferes with Perilous Iteration tutoring Arclight Phoenix. And I'm not really sure you need Finale of Promise in this deck because, Finale is normally a card that bridges the gap in the mid-game, helps you get to 3 spells. And since we're running Expressive Iteration and Perilous Iteration, which kind of do a similar thing in a way, I think not only is there not really room for Finale of Promise, but I don't really think you need it when you have these cards that can kind of produce 2-for-1s for you anyway. And getting Gigantha as the companion is pretty nice. There's not too much synergy with Gigantha in this deck, but just having it as an additional threat is really sick. Since we only really have Shredder as a card that is actively decent against Graveyard Hate, having Gigantha is another big threat that we can use to push through damage is decent. And another weakness of the deck that I'm going to get to later is, because of how the deck is built, we can't really afford to be running too many creatures in general, so having an extra creature as the companion is really useful to kind of offset that weakness a little bit. Then the mana base, we're running 22 lands here, which is maybe a little high when we have so many cantrips. You could probably get away with 21 in general, but I think the issue, I'll get to this later, but one of the big issues with this deck is the mana base. To enable Perilous Iteration, even though it's on 2, we do need to be running a lot of green sources. And if we do end up trimming on lands, in order to consistently have green on turn 2 and still be able to cast everything else, we might end up needing to cut a basic, which then makes us vulnerable to Field of Ruin and Assassin's Trophy. So I think 22 lands has been fine. The mana base is definitely one of the weaknesses, but it does work. I've not had issues with not being able to cast stuff on curve. It's mainly taking damage off the mana base and occasionally having issues with the fast lands later in the game as well, that I'll get to when I cover the weaknesses later. But in general, the mana base does work for what we want. But I don't think you can really afford to go down on lands, or you end up being too vulnerable to Assassin's Trophy or Field of Ruin. So yeah, mana base does work, but it's quite painful, which is one of the weaknesses. And I'm quickly going to go over the sideboard. I've got 4 Braid here as additional removal. Against creature decks, we bring this in addition to the Fiery Impulses. Obviously, a lot of creature decks, there's just going to be running smaller creatures, so we can cut the Lightning Axes, which are obviously is card disadvantage, replace them with a Braid. The thing I really like about a Braid is that it also enables us to kill Unlicensed Hearse. Because we're slightly more all-in on Phoenixes because of Perilous Iteration, I think it is very important to have ways to kill Graveyard Hate, and against the creature decks where you want a Braid, the vast majority of them are going to be running artifacts as their graveyard hate, either Unlicensed Hearse or Soul Guide Lanterns, so having a Braid as an answer there is nice. And obviously, artifact decks still exist in the format, Blue-White Affinity and Thopters are still around, so a Braid is also decent against them. Then we've got 2 copies of Brotherhood's End, so this is a little bit annoying because it does mean we can't run Gigantha as a companion, and it also interferes with the Perilous Iteration hits, but the decks where we want this, it's so good that it doesn't really matter, and oftentimes hitting it off Perilous Iteration is actually beneficial, so against the artifact decks like Affinity and Thopters, this is great as well, and then against the very go-wide aggro decks, stuff like humans and elves and, merfolk and stuff like that, Brotherhood's End is really great there as well, because, a lot of those creature decks take advantage of the fact that they trade pretty favourably with single target removal, so having Brotherhood's End as a sweeper is really nice there as well. Then one of the other big advantages to being in green is that we get to run Cindervines. So Cindervines is really nice because it gives the deck a way to kill enchantments. Typically one of the biggest weaknesses of Izzet Phoenix is that it really struggles to deal with enchantments, and the biggest problem with that is Rest in Peace. So Rest in Peace is one of the biggest reasons why Control is capable of beating you, and there are obviously a number of other white decks that can run enchantments as well. Enchantress is still a deck in the format, 9 Life Solemnity, and the only real way that Izzet Phoenix has of interacting with those sorts of cards or decks in general is Brazen Borrower, which really isn't a great answer, especially to something like a Rest in Peace where it's already exiled everything in the graveyard anyway. So Cindervines giving you a way to kill enchantments is really nice. It's also just a generically good card against Control in general. Typically against Control with Izzet Phoenix, the main cards you're bringing in are counter spells, which we are running a couple of, in Spell Pierce. But typically you also want to be running some number of Planeswalkers, whether that's Narset or Chandra or the new Jaya. And obviously we can't run any Planeswalkers because it would interfere with Perilous Iteration and Phoenix. But Cindervines is just a really good card against Control in general. It just deals them a bunch of chip damage as they're casting spells throughout the course of the game, which gets them down to a low life total, which then often allows us to finish them off with stuff like Arclight Phoenix. It also enables us to kill, Rest in Peace, like I said, which was a big weakness of the Izzet Wizards, and you can also use it to kill stuff like Portable Hole as well. On top of that, I also think this card is pretty good against the Trap Finder decks because you can get this into play. They are playing essentially like a control deck for the most part, and then once this is in play, all you have to do is just keep 1 mana open on each of your turns, and then you can use this to kill the Ashnod's Altar at instant speed to just stop the opponent comboing off. Whereas if you're if you're relying on something like a Braid, the opponent can very easily just hit you with a discard spell, get rid of the Braid, and then combo off. Whereas having a Cindervines in play, it basically just stops them going infinite unless they kill it with an Assassin's Trophy. So I really like Cindervines. I feel like it solves a lot of the problems that this particular build of the deck would have against Control. And being able to kill Rest in Peace is a really big boon, and another big reason to be splashing green. And like I said, we've got a couple of copies of Spell Pierce as well, so in the gameplay that I've got coming up, I was originally running Fading Hope in this slot as just another way to be able to get rid of bigger creatures, but I didn't queue into Control for a while, and then when I did queue into Control, I realised that I just didn't have enough cards for that matchup because, we obviously want to cut Lightning Axe, and Fiery Impulse not being able to hit Planeswalkers meant that we would often have to keep in a couple of Fiery Impulse, and it basically just didn't do anything until the opponent made like Wandering Emperor or Shark Typhoon tokens, so swapped out the Fading Hope for Spell Pierce, and, in general, it's been a decent swap. Having access to Spell Pierce is really nice in the matchup, and then sideboarding against Control is really clean. You just cut the Lightning Axe and Fiery Impulse for the Cindervines and Spell Pierce. And then finally, we've got a couple copies of Unlicensed Hearse as just Graveyard Hate. Obviously, very good in the mirror match, very good against like Kethis combo or any deck interacting with the graveyard in general. And yeah, this is a key card in the mirror match. I don't think you really want more than 2, even though you have a bunch of ways to cycle it away. But yeah, in the matchups where you want Graveyard Hate, this has been very important. So that's the deck overall. I think Perilous Iteration, being able to find Phoenix, is a really, really nice interaction. And Cindervines giving you a way to kill Rest in Peace and other enchantments does help to shore up a weakness that the Izzet Wizards deck has as well. Now, in terms of the weaknesses of this deck, I think the biggest weakness in general is the mana base. Obviously, because we need green on turn 2, which requires 13 sources, as well as, one of the biggest issues with building a 3-color mana base for Phoenix is not only do you need a certain number of lands to be able to cast your cards on curve. Because you need to cast 3 spells in a turn to bring back the Arclight Phoenix, and a lot of your cantrips are different colours, you will often need like red-green into blue if you want to go iteration into consider into opt, or like red-green into blue into red if you want to go Perilous Iteration into opt into Faithless Looting, for example. So you need all of your lands to be dual lands. You can't really afford to be running pathways in this deck because, say you're running the red-green pathway and you play it on green to be able to cast Perilous Iteration, then later in the game that's going to come back to bite you if you need to cast a blue or red spell and you only have that pathway available. So that's the reason why we're having to run so many dual lands. That's the reason why we're having to run Mana Confluence in addition to Stomping Ground and Steam Vents. So not only do we take a lot of damage off our lands because we're running Steam Vents, Stomping Ground and Mana Confluence, which is an issue against decks like Burn, for example. Now, it's not a complete issue. I have managed to beat Burn with this deck a few times. I've managed to beat aggro fairly consistently as well. Honestly, it's more of an issue as the game goes long if you're having to repeatedly use Mana Confluence, because we don't have any ways to gain life. So if we're having to tap Mana Confluence for mana as the game goes long and we're dealing ourselves damage, that can definitely add up. So the mana base being painful can be an issue in certain matchups. Additionally, having to run 8 fast lands can be an issue as well. Now, typically you want to be running fast lands in Phoenix because being able to curve out in the first few turns is really important. Being able to get off to a fast start is important. Being able to cast Chandler or Shredder into, 3 spells on turn 3 to bring back Phoenix is important. But additionally, because the deck does often need to be able to grind in the mid to late game, you want your lands to be entering untapped later as well, and it can come back to bite you if you go, for example, like Ledger Shredder into a cantrip to pitch your Phoenix, into Expressive Iteration, trying to dig for an untapped land to cast your last cantrip to bring back Phoenixes, and if the land that you hit is a Spybluff Canal or Botanical Sanctum and it's entering tapped, that can be a really big issue because then that stops you from bringing back your Phoenixes, which can, that can often be the difference between winning and losing. So having to run so many fast lands is potentially an issue as well. Now, it's not always going to be an issue because we do have so many ways to pitch stuff. We can discard them to looting and to Ledger Shredder and to Lightning Axe. We can, dig for other untapped lands, but I have had some issues with these coming into play tap later in the game, meaning that I don't have enough mana to play the third cantrip to get back the Phoenix. Additionally, because the way the deck is built, I'm not sure, having 8 different 2 mana iterations has been a bit of an issue in terms of deck building, because since we're splashing green for Perilous Iteration, I feel like we have to be running 4 copies of this. And I feel like Iteration is just one of the best cards in Phoenix in general, so it makes sense to me to be running 8. But because we're running 8 2-mana cantrips, I feel like we have to make room for the 1-mana cantrips to consistently allow us to get back the Phoenix on turn 3, or, to consistently be able to get back the Phoenix on turn 4 if we go one of our iterations into 2 1-mana cantrips. And because I feel like we need, 4 consider, 4 looting, 4 impulse, 2 lightning axe, that does mean that we don't have that much room for other creatures in the deck. Ideally, I would like to fit at least a couple more creatures in the deck in an ideal world, maybe a couple of Balmor, maybe a couple of Sprite Dragon as well. So because we're running 8 of these iterations, I feel like we're quite light on other creatures as well. Now, having Gigantha as the companion does help to address that somewhat, which is pretty nice, but, I'm not sure what the right way to build this is in terms of getting the numbers right to get more creatures in the deck, because like I said, I don't think we can really afford to go lower than 22. If you wanted to cut a land, I think the next one to cut would be Mountain, and if you do that, then you make your deck very vulnerable to stuff like Assassin's Trophy, which is quite popular in the Gen Trapfinder decks. They can just start 2-mana Stone Raining your lands, which is an issue. And then if you start cutting any of the dual lands, then you don't have enough, you don't have enough green sources to consistently find Perilous Iteration on turn 2. So trying to figure out the numbers in this deck has been kind of awkward. The other option is to potentially cut one of the iterations, but like I said, we're splashing green for Perilous Iteration. It doesn't really make sense to run less than 4 of this, and I can't bring myself to run less than 4 Expressive Iteration in Phoenix either, so I'm not quite sure what the right solution to that problem is. And the final problem I have with the deck is that you are just kind of soft to certain cards. Shieldred is an incredibly good card against you, even though you have 2 Lightning Axes as an answer, you're not always going to have stuff like that. Esper Sentinel Thalia is very good against you. I've come across Containment Priest, I've come across Maindeck Rest in Peace. So, Phoenix, definitely, you are just going to lose some matches to people having hate cards, which is another weakness of Phoenix. Now, again, that only comes up, in occasional matches. It's not a thing that happens all the time. And I do think this deck is powerful and able to win consistently, but there are a decent number of problems with this deck. And like I've explained, but to be honest, I think a few of them could be fixed just by changing numbers of stuff in the deck. Now, again, I'm not quite sure what the numbers would be. You know, again, I would quite like to be running more non-Phoenix creatures if I could find out. So if you have any suggestions in the comments for how you could tweak the numbers in this deck to maybe fit in some more creatures, how we could tweak numbers of the mana base so we're not so reliant on the fast lands or mana confluence, then I think that would, you know, that could be the difference between this deck being what I consider to be like tier 1.5 to push it up to tier 1, because, you know, I think Perilous Iteration with Phoenix is such a powerful interaction that I definitely think it's worth exploring. Now, the other idea that I've had that I've not properly tested out yet, which could help address a lot of these issues, is maybe just running red-green prowess. You know, running stuff like Monastery Swift Spear and Soulscar Mage, and the 2-mana prowess card that discards a card if you have 20 or more instances or sorceries in your deck is another discard outlet for Phoenix. And then you could run like Abundant Harvest and you line up the shot and stuff like that. But the quality of the cantrips in that deck is a lot lower, so I'm not really sure that's going to make the cut. But yeah, either way, let me know in the comments if you have any ideas for potential ways that you could improve the deck. But outside of that, I've had so much fun playing this deck. I definitely think there's a lot of potential here, and I'm definitely excited to be continuing work on this deck as it goes forward. So next up, I've got 3 matches that I was playing with this deck so you guys can see it in action. If you've got any questions about the deck or any suggestions for how to improve it, definitely let me know in the comments, and I hope you enjoy the gameplay. Big up. Okay, sweet, here we go. Okay, so we're on the play here, which is nice. And I mean, one land is always risky to keep, but we have consider and opt to try and find the second land. So I'm going to risk this, you know. I think we've got a decent chance of finding the second land, so I don't think this is too bad. And then, yeah, if we can find a second land for Legislator, that'll be ideal. Then we could potentially either chain 3 spells together, you know, using the Shredder to pitch the Phoenix into the graveyard on turn 3, which would be ideal, or could also go for expressive iteration on turn 3 as well. So, assuming we hit the second land, I think this hand is pretty good. So we'll definitely shock in the land here so that we can consider during the end step to try and find that land so that we can play Shredder onto. Okay, Inspiring Vantage. So probably the Thopter's deck here, I'd imagine. Oh, wow, perfect. Okay, we've been a Phoenix. That's obviously ideal. Oh, wow, we don't find a land. Yikes. Okay, so I've really got to hope to find one off this opt here. I mean, keeping looting could be good going into next turn. Oh, wow. Max punished. I mean, obviously now I kind of regret not keeping the looting, because we could have lootinged away 2 Phoenixes, had 2 digs for another land, but I think the advantage of finding a second land here is so much higher that it's worth bottoming the looting to try and find. Because if we hit an untapped red source, we can play Channeler on 2 and then go Iteration next turn, which would be sick. Okay, so opponent plays Play with Fire and Consider, so definitely not on Thopters, so maybe Jeskai Wizards? You know, I have seen some Wizards list Splashing White for Lurus, and I guess they have access to, like, Lightning Helix as well. Okay, perfect. Well, not perfect, but, like, it's very good that we found a land there, so get to play Shredder here. You know, we have essentially, you know, time walked ourselves with our lands, so in terms of tempo, we're basically on the draw now, but at least we found the second land. That's the most important thing, I think. Okay, yeah, so they're definitely on Wizards then. Makes sense. Okay, so we've got a lot of options here. I think I'm going to lead on Iteration because I really want to find a removal spell, like a Fire Impulse if I can. Okay, they fire off the Wizard's Lightning here before we get to Connive, which is a bit annoying. Okay, perfect. We hit the Fire Impulse, so it's just whether we want to get a land here or put Shredder in hand. I think I'd probably want a land here because I would like to, you know, we definitely want to cast the Fire Impulse here. Now, they could have Spell Pierce, but I doubt they have it in the main deck, so get to kill the Symmetry Sage. And then I wanted that extra land because I want to potentially be able to go Perilous Iteration into looting if we draw it. Okay. I mean, drawing a second Channeler here and the opponent just putting Lurus into hand, I think I'm just going to go double channeler into Perilous Iteration. Now, I think the highest upside potential play there is just Perilous Iteration to try and find a looting. Definitely going to bin a land here to get Delirium online. Okay, so we find another Phoenix off the Iteration. Would love to find Faithless Looting here, obviously. I mean, even if we don't find looting, we're still discarding one of these Phoenixes to the Perilous Iteration anyway. I'm going to set a stop during the upkeep because we might want to Lightning Axe before our draw step to try and find a looting if we can. That would be ideal. We could also just hardcast Phoenix if the opponent doesn't do anything too powerful. You know, hardcast one of the Phoenixes, let the other one go to the yard so that we can hopefully draw into some cantrips to get them back. Okay, opponent uses Play with Fire on one of the channelers. Okay, and they pass. Oh, nice. Okay, another Perilous Iteration. So we could Perilous Iteration or we could hardcast the Phoenix. I think I'm going to go for the Iteration here. And I think we want Consider on top because we are going to be pitching one of the Phoenixes. Oh, wow. Wait, have we already got all 4 Phoenixes? Oh, whoops. Okay, I completely forgot that I milled one over earlier. So, I mean, obviously it worked out because we hit the Shredder, but I think it probably would have been better there for us to just hardcast the Phoenix. Had I realised that we only had one... sorry. Had I only realised that I only had... Like, we already had all the Phoenixes out of the deck, I probably would have just gone for the Phoenix instead. I mean, obviously we got quite lucky with the Shredder here. Okay, we get to pick one of the Phoenixes to the Ledger Shredder, which is perfect. Now we can go Consider, try and find another cantrip, which we do, perfect. And we can go Consider again, pitch the Phoenix to the Ledger Shredder. I think I'm going to bin that because I want to just keep finding cantrips here if I can. Pitch the Phoenix. You just want to keep cantrips, like I said, so that if the opponent does kill Phoenixes, we have more ways to give them back. And then we can kill the Symmetry Sage here, which I think should be lethal. Yeah, sweet. So that worked out even though we missed the second land, which is pretty nice. So here, I mean, Lightning Axe is just... I mean, it's cheaper than a Braid, but a Braid kills everything that Lightning Axe does anyway. I think we probably want as much removal as possible, and I think I'm just going to trim on Iteration here. We could bring in Brotherhood's End, but I don't think it's really worth it, to be honest, because they don't go wide particularly quickly on this. They just have a really, really creature-heavy hand. Sideboarding with this list is pretty hard, honestly. I think we do want 4 Fire Impulse for a Braid, but I'm not sure what the cuts are here. I think, you know, we can't really afford to cut... Since we're bringing in 2-mana instants... I don't think we can afford to cut any of the 1-mana instants and sorceries because then we're going to struggle, you know, being able to bring back the Phoenixes because we're essentially cutting 2 1-mana instants to bring in a Braid. So I think we have to trim on the iterations here, which, again, this deck is really difficult to know how to build and how to sideboard with because Expressive Iteration and Perilous Iteration are such powerful cards, but you also just need a high density of 1-mana instants or sorceries or you're going to struggle to get back Phoenix on turn 3 or turn 4 if you need to use an iteration to, you know, as your first cantrip. So this hand isn't ideal. We don't have any interaction, which is the most important thing in this matchup, but we do have Opt to try and find it, and we do have iteration here as well. Okay, no creature on turn 1 is ideal. That's perfect. So I think I'm just going to pass here. And there, I mean, there is some consideration to... I was going to say there is some consideration to saving the Opt... Oh, perfect. Okay, we hit the Fiery Impulse. That's ideal. I was going to say save the Opt for turn 3 so that we can bring back the Phoenix, but since we hit the Fiery Impulse, which is what we're after here, we can just play the Ledger Shredder so that Fiery Impulse deals 3 damage. Pitch the Phoenix, and I think we can get away with pitching a land considering we have Iteration in hand that can help us dig for more lands. And then we can kill the Arcanist before it starts running away with the game because Arcanist can deal an insane amount of damage out of nowhere if we don't kill it. Wow, okay, they just put Luris into hand. That's really good for us. So I think here we're just going to go Shredder into Dragon's Rage Channeler and try and set up for... Okay, yeah, pitch the second Channeler here. And now we can hopefully set up for a big Expressive Iteration turn next turn. And I assume the opponent has no more creatures in hand if they spent their entire turn just putting Luris into their hand. Shredder's also out of Wizard's Lightning range here as well, which is sick. I mean, they could bring in Molten Impacts against us, but I think it should dodge most of their interaction. Okay, they set a stop. Searing Blood's interesting. But yeah, they did that to avoid the Ledger Shredder conniving here, which makes sense. We do take 3 off the Searing Blood, which isn't ideal. Oh, wow. Okay, Fire Impulse is another great top deck here. So I think, you know, we could go for Iteration here, but I think I like going for just getting the second Shredder in play. Okay, I'll pitch a land here, and I think I'll pitch the Perilous Iteration. And now we have 2 Shredders in play. Next turn we can go for, you know, potentially Iteration or a Braid, depending on the situation. Now, we could have gone for Iteration last turn, but I feel like if we whiff on you know, we're definitely not guaranteed to get 3 spells to get back the Phoenix. So I feel like we're better off getting a Shredder in play for, like, guaranteed board presence and, like, a guaranteed blocker. Okay, so opponent Mentor's Guidance. I mean, obviously we would love to be able to kill the Symmetry Sage in response so that they don't get the copy. But either way, we're definitely going to be able to kill the Symmetry Sage next turn, which is great. So I think, you know, we could whiff on Expressive Iteration, which would be really rough. Okay, perfect. That's great. So we do have the land, which enables us to play the Abrade. Okay, opponent just scoops it up. Sweet, we got there. Okay, so we're on the draw here, I assume. You know, I don't think there are any decks in the format right now where not choosing to go first is right. Oh, is the opponent disconnected maybe? Well, to be honest, I used to play on a really slow laptop, so it took me a while to get in sometimes. Okay, sweet, we're here. So, yeah, I think this hand looks pretty reasonable. You know, we don't have too many spells, but we do have early interaction and, you know, creatures on turn 1 and 2. So I think this is a fine keep. Okay, perfect. More interaction. So it looks like we're against maybe mono red, if I had to guess. Not sure whether it will be burn or just like straight mono red aggro. I think Kumano faces Kakizan, so he's playing both, so... Let's see what the opponent does here. Okay, play with fire, so that makes me think they're probably on burn, if I had to guess. Well, they don't play a creature, so they don't get any bonuses off the second chapter of Kumano, which is great for us. I think we're just going to play the Shredder here. You know, it's going to be awkward for them if they have no burn spell that can deal 3 damage. You know, having to use 2 burn spells to kill a Shredder is really bad because you obviously it would give me the Connive, which would make it even, you know, bigger. Potentially pitch the Phoenix as well. So I think I'm just going to let this through. That does potentially enable Spectacle for light up the stage, but I don't want to block and then them kill it with another 2 damage burn spell like a play with fire. Skew it. Wait, why did Skew the Critics cost 3 there? Did they not get Spectacle? Oh well, either way. Definitely going to lead on the iteration here. This is tough because I really want both looting and iteration here, but I think I'm just going to put back the iteration. Definitely going to pass with Fiery Impulse up here. You know, there's no real reason to Fire Impulse during our turn. If the Etching of Kumano was a wizard, then I would do it to make Wizard's Lightning more expensive, but I feel like it's worth waiting because it might, you know, they might play differently with the assumption that the Etching of Kumano is living. So, you know, they might have played something in their main phase that they wouldn't have done if they'd known their Etching of Kumano dies, but it's pretty marginal. I think it's completely fine to just do it during your turn as well. Okay, so now if we can go iteration and find a cantrip, we can pitch the Phoenix and go off, which is nice. Okay, so we can put Perilous Iteration into hand, get the opt. I'm going to opt first just because I'd rather not play Mana Confluence against the burn deck. Okay, Phoenix is 6. So unfortunately we do have to deal ourselves a damage off the Mana Confluence here. So this is the sort of matchup where running a 3-color deck is going to be, you know, painful against the burn deck. But at least we get to get back both Phoenixes here. Now, unfortunately, I don't think I can attack with both of them. I think that would be too greedy at 9 against the burn deck, especially when they have both Den of the Bugbear and Ramunap Ruins available. I mean, they could have a burn spell in hand, but if they use one of their burn spells to kill a Phoenix, that's less damage that's going face, so... okay, they do have Bone Crusher Giant, so... okay, they drew Swift Spear off the top, and yeah, I assume they cast the Bone Crusher Giant. So maybe it was greedy to attack last turn, but I feel like we have to start applying some pressure back, or we're just giving the opponent too many chances to draw burn spells off the top. So here the annoying thing is, like, we can bring back Phoenixes here. We can tutor a Phoenix with a Perilous Iteration. If we can find another cantrip, that'd be ideal. Okay, perfect. So we hit an opt. So now we can go opt, Lightning Axe, bring back the Phoenix here. But the annoying thing is the Etching of Kumano is going to flip next turn. So if we block with the Phoenixes, they get exiled. So I would love to be able to go opt, or to hold this Lightning Axe up to kill the Etching of Kumano, but since we're taking a damage off the Mana Confluence, I don't think we can afford to kill the Bone Crusher Giant here, because we take an extra 2, which would put us down to 4, which is really rough. So I think we'll take out the Monastery Swift Spear. We can cleanly block the Bone Crusher with the Phoenixes, so that's not a priority. But now, like I said, the annoying thing is it's going to flip to Etching of Kumano, which means if we do block with the Phoenixes, they get exiled. So like I said, I would have loved to be able to hold up the Lightning Axe, but I don't think we can afford to shock in a land here, considering we're already down to 6, and we played quite conservatively last turn. So, yeah, this is rough. We're probably losing at least 2 Phoenixes on defense here. I mean, we would love for the opponent not to attack, because then we could try and dig for a removal spell for the Etching of Kumano, and then potentially hold the Phoenixes back and have them not die. Have them not get exiled, sorry. Okay, so Fiery Impulse is great. Now we can kill the Etching of Kumano. So we don't have to worry about... yeah, we don't have to worry about our Phoenixes getting exiled anymore. Okay, definitely going to bin a land here. Gets Delirium online. Don't think we really want looting here. Wow, okay, Lightning Axe is interesting. So I think here we can afford to attack with everything now, because if we attack with all 3 Phoenixes here, we put them down to 8, so they're dead on board to the Phoenixes next turn. And so if they fire up Den, we can block with the Channeler, kill the Den with the Fire Impulse, kill the other creature with the Lightning Axe. Oh, wow. Okay, they Lightning Strike us, so really hope they don't draw another burn spell off the top. Now, again, I think we're still alive here, right? Because we can block the Bone Crusher Giant. If they have a land, we can block the Bone Crusher Giant with the Channeler, kill the Den with the Lightning Axe, kill the Etching of Kumano with the Fire Impulse. If they had a 3 damage burn spell, I imagine they would go face. If they drew like a 2 damage burn spell, I imagine they try and kill the Channeler here, in which case we're also fine. Okay, yeah, so they use Blast on the Channeler. I think, no point in waiting here. I might as well get the value off the Surveils now. So we kill the Etching of Kumano with the Fiery Impulse. We can use Lightning Axe to kill the Bone Crusher Giant, and now they're just dead to the Phoenixes. So that was close, though. That was super close. We were had we shocked in that land to kill the Etching of Kumano earlier, we would have been dead. Had we taken the damage anywhere else, we would have been dead. Thankfully, we just got there by the skin of our teeth. But yeah, this is the sort of matchup that's obviously going to be a lot harder with Temur Phoenix than regular Phoenix, because we're taking significantly more damage off our lands. So we definitely want the Abrades here. More efficient than Lightning Axes, and I think since we're bringing in the Braids, we have to trim on some of the iterations, or we just have too few 1-mana cantrips. So just going to trim on Expressive Iteration. Main reason for that is that, Phoenix was obviously a big part of staying in that game, And the nice thing against aggro about Perilous Iteration over Expressive Iteration is you want to cast it on turn 2, whereas Expressive Iteration you really don't want to cast on turn 2. So you can cast it earlier, and it gets Phoenix into your hand so you can hard cast it, or it discards it immediately so it's in the graveyard so you can bring it back as a blocker later. So I definitely think against aggro that Perilous Iteration is better than Expressive Iteration. And again, like, I really don't, like, it just feels bad cutting Perilous Iteration when we're making our mana base, you know, a lot more painful and a bit less consistent to enable it as well. Wow, this hand's really nice. 2 bits of early interaction and Shredder plus a cantrip. Yeah, this looks solid. Shredder is also really good in this matchup if we can get it to 4 toughness. So definitely going to Fiery Impulse now before they can boost it with Prowess, before they can cast Wizard's Lightning for 1 mana, before they can attack and get Light up the stage. Okay, second Scorpio Mage. Wow, they missed lands as well. I mean, definitely just going to use the Abrade here. If they've kept a 1-lander, there's a good chance they have Light up the stage in their hand, and I don't want to let them get in for free damage off the Soulskull Mage if I can avoid it. Okay, Swift Spear. Wow, okay, another Abrade. Again, just going to take out their creature here before they can start casting Wizard's Lightning, or, you know, Light up the stage is the big one. If I had to guess, if they've kept a 1-lander with a bunch of creatures, they probably have Light up the stage. So going to run out Shredder here and then consider, hopefully put this out. Well, I guess there's no mana, you know, Lightning Bolt's not in the format, so definitely want to discard something here. I'm going to go for the Opt. Oh, wow, okay, another Abrade on top. So, I mean, even if the opponent hadn't been missing lands, I think we've drawn really well against an aggro deck in this game. So even if they had kept curving out, I think we would have had a decent chance because we're drawing so much removal, because we managed to get Shredder to a 2/4. So I think I'm going to go Expressive Iteration, try and find an untapped land into Shredder. This is the kind of example... Oh, that's a bit annoying. But this is the kind of example why running 8 fast lands is a problem, because this is a spot where we would love to be able to, you know, guarantee having an untapped land for Shredder. So even though I would, you know, kind of want to ditch this Botanical Sanctum, putting Ledger Shredder into a 3/5 basically makes it impossible for the opponent to kill using burn spells now. And then we can just play the Botanical Sanctum tapped, get him for 3, because yeah, if they have like, unless they have 2 3 damage burn spells, or even if they, yeah, if they had like 3 damage burn spell plus a 2 damage burn spell, we get the Connive off Shredder, which can turn it into a 4/6. So okay, there's Eidolon, interesting. I mean, we can just kill that straight away. I think it's probably more beneficial for us to take less damage off the Eidolon than to get an additional Connive off the Shredder. Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunate for the opponent, but I think we still would have had a chance, even if they had had their second land on curve there. Okay, sweet. So we're on the play here. And, I mean, this is a risky keep because we don't have any creatures, but we have Perilous Iteration that's guaranteed to find us an Arclight Phoenix, so that's, you know, essentially a guaranteed creature that way. Even though we would like to play Steam Vents tapped to avoid us taking damage off the Shocklands, I feel like we probably want to lead on the Sanctums here because we're running, you know, we're running 8 fast lands, so the chances of us drawing more fast lands aren't that low. And, you know, you can get punished for waiting to play the fast lands if you draw more off the top, essentially. Okay. So opponent plays Leyline of Abundance, so I think I'm actually going to lead on an untapped Steam Vents here so that we can Lightning Axe Lana Royals if they have it. Considering they've mulled down to, what was that, 5? Yeah, I definitely think we're going to Lightning Axe here. I mean, we could opt to try and find a Fiery Impulse, but I think it's better to do it this way, and then we can guaranteed play the Perilous Iteration on turn 2. Oh, sweet. So now we got a Fiery Impulse. So if the opponent plays another Llanowar Elves here... okay, they don't. I was going to say, if they play another Llanowar Elves, we've got like a perfect setup here. Hopefully we can find another cantrip here. If we can just pitch both... okay, sweet. So we got another looting, which is sick. So now we definitely want to pitch both Fire Impulse and Phoenix, because we're discarding both of them at the end of the turn anyway. And then we can just go for looting again. what do I want to pitch here? Definitely one of these lands. I mean, this might be greedy, but I'm tempted to pitch both lands. We have Expressive Iteration, Perilous Iteration, and Opt that can all find us lands as well. So, yeah, just get the Phoenix back here. Okay, just the Nykthos from the opponent. So I'm going to lead on the Expressive Iteration here, see what we find. Okay, sick. That's pretty nice. So we can put Shredder into hand, play the Stomping Ground here, and then just play Shredder. And then we can set up for a pretty big turn next turn where we could go Perilous Iteration, trigger the Shredder off Opt to discard one of the Phoenixes. And then, you know, if we can find like a looting or something, then we can pitch both of the Phoenixes here. Oh, whoops. I mean, I should have tapped the Botanical Sanctum for mana there instead. Either way, we get to pitch one of the Phoenixes here. I think I'm going to pitch the one that was already going to the graveyard anyway. Going to keep the Fiery Impulse in case they play a creature that we want to be able to kill. I'm going to keep the other Phoenix in hand just because we could potentially just hardcast it, which isn't that bad, you know. Although I guess... I mean, it doesn't really matter because we have these Faithless Lootings in the graveyard. Okay, opponent just scoops it up. So their whole hand was just, you know, reliant on that Llanowar's living, which is, you know, one of the big weaknesses of Mono Green Devotion. So here... sideboarding is tough in this matchup because we kind of want to keep Lightning Axes in to deal with like Old Growth Troll and Cavalier and stuff, but we kind of want a Braid. I mean, the thing is with Devotion is we don't really have to worry about Graveyard Hate because I think the only Graveyard Hate they're going to have is fetchable off Karn. I don't think they're going to be bringing in like Unlicensed Hearse or anything against us, and I'm going to bring in... I kind of want to bring in Fading Hope because it's another card that can deal with a turn 1 elf to just buy us some tempo, which is really important going second. You know, a Braid just isn't good enough at slowing them down because if they go turn 1 Llanowar Elves on the play, you don't have any way to deal with it. And Fading Hope being able to bounce like an Old Growth Troll is pretty nice as well. If it goes to a game 3, I could potentially see swapping Fading Hope out for a Braid instead because then it can kill a turn 1 elf before it starts getting them a ton of advantage. Okay, definitely need to keep a hand with a Fiery Impulse. Oh, wow, they don't have a Llanowar Elves. Okay. That's good for us, obviously. I'm going to play Steam Vents untapped here just so we can kill an elf if they play one. You know, we just want to slow them down as much as possible. Okay, no elf is kind of good to see, but Old Growth Troll is going to be a concern, I think. Okay, so we go to the end step and discard. I mean, we could have discarded the Phoenix that we were going to discard anyway, if that makes sense, but I feel like I kind of want to keep this Arclight Phoenix in hand because we're kind of low on resources a little bit. You know, we could potentially hardcast the Phoenix, which is the reason why I decided to discard the one that was already going to the graveyard. So here, I'm still kind of tempted to hold on to the Phoenix to hardcast next turn, but I feel like, you know, we know the opponent is going to be playing, well, I assume they're going to be playing an Old Growth Troll here. And so we can go double Fiery Impulse to kill the Old Growth Troll, and we get a Connive off the Shredder, which hopefully will be good enough to find us the third spell to bring back the Phoenixes. So maybe it would have been better to... Oh, wow, okay. They just got Karn, so I assume they get Tormod's Crypt here, which is a little bit rough. Considering it, yeah, a lot of our aggression is reliant on the Phoenixes here. So because we want to apply pressure now, you know, we don't have access to the Phoenixes anymore because of Tormod's Crypt. I do want to get the +1/+1 counter on the Ledger Shredder, so it does mean losing a Fiery Impulse, but I think we just got to go for that. Now, we could potentially Fiery Impulse our own Shredder to turn it into a 3-power creature to attack down the Karn, but that really seems like a waste. You know, they're not going to get that much value off the Karn while it's at 1 loyalty. You know, they have to just plus it and do kind of nothing for the turn, which should hopefully allow us to kill it next turn. And I would quite like to save this Fiery Impulse to be able to kill one of their creatures if possible. Yeah, we are kind of flooding out here a little bit. Thankfully, we have the looting in the graveyard, but there's a chance they fire off the Tormod's Crypt preemptively to shut that off, which would be a bit annoying. Okay, so they do cast the Old Growth Troll, gets them a card off the Kiora. I mean, thankfully, I still feel like we could be ahead on tempo. You know, if they have a second Old Growth Troll, oh, well, they do. I mean, at least we get the connives off the Shredder here, which should hopefully be able to get rid of some of these lands. Okay, so that's that Shredder. I think for the first Shredder we want to pitch a land. So I'm going to pitch a Stomping Ground here. And then... I mean, we obviously don't want to pitch an Arclight Phoenix ideally because then it will just get hit by the Tormod's Crypt. I think I'm going to pitch a Mana Confluence here. And then we can either go Shredder into something else if we draw another cantrip, or potentially just hardcast an Arclight Phoenix next turn. See what we draw. Okay, so we do draw an Opt, so we could potentially go hardcast Phoenix into Opt to get 2 connives off the Shredders, which could allow us to race here, honestly. Like, obviously 2 Old Growth Trolls is going to deal a lot of damage on the ground, but you know, we're going to be able to cleanly take out the Khan and go face with the other 2 creatures. So I think I'm just going to go for Opt. I ideally want to prioritize pitching non-lands to these connives here so that we buff the Ledger Shredder and just try and race here. I think I'm just going to pitch the Shredder here. Okay, and I'll keep Perilous Iteration. And now we can cleanly kill the Khan with the 2-power Shredder and go 6 damage face. Which puts them down to... What that would be... Puts them down to 12, and then... I mean, we still need to be careful about these Old Growth Trolls, because we are on a 2-turn clock, but we should be able to hold stuff back on blocking. We can turn one of these Ledger Shredders into a 4/6, which basically stonewalls the Old Growth Troll. Oh wait, they have Nykthos. Oh no, okay, that's really bad. So I think they can win if they just animate the Lair of the Hydra here. I'm hoping they miss it. I'm hoping they don't see that line. No, I can see them hovering over it. Okay. So that kind of sucks. We're just dead here, but I mean, I don't think we can play around that, right? We're at 16, so chances of them getting, like, the only way we die this turn is to exactly Nykthos there, so don't think we really should have played around that, but that's a little bit unfortunate. So, I mean, we could swap out Fading Hope for a Braid here, but I mean, I don't mind keeping in the Fading Hopes here. I think they're actually pretty reasonable in this matchup because, you know, bouncing an Old Growth Troll is a pretty good way of dealing with it. You know, gets us back ahead on tempo. Using it on Cavalier of Thorns isn't ideal, but still an option if we're going to go for that. You know, it's a way to get rid of it to be able to attack, which can often be good enough to win. So this hand looks pretty decent. I mean, obviously, you know, a few too many lands, but we should hopefully be able to connive off the Ledger Shredder. Oh, well, they have Leon Abundance again. That's a little rough, but we have Fiery Impulse for the turn 1 elf, which is the most important thing. Oh, wow, okay. So they just lead on Nykthos, which is good for us. That's weird. Why would they lead on Nykthos if they had a forest? Do they keep a 1-lander? Oh, wow. They kept a 1-lander off the back of Leyline of Abundance. I mean, that can't be right, surely. We're going to lead on the Opt here. Just, yeah, try and find a second spell so that we can connive here. So we Opt, we'll get the connive, and I think I'll just pitch the looting here. You know, we don't have anything that we really want to discard, and the rest is all interaction, means that once the opponent finally does get their land, we have tons of interaction to be able to deal with whatever they play. And Chandler off the top is great at just filtering our draws out as well. Okay, so they do draw a Lair of the Hydra, and they play Llanowar Elves. Okay, sweet. So we can go Perilous Iteration here to guarantee a Phoenix. Oh, well, and we bin another Phoenix. So really hope to hit another cantrip. Okay. So we don't hit a cantrip, but we can go into full control and Fading Hope the Llanowar Elves and then Fiery Impulse the Llanowar Elves in response. Which, you know, seems a bit weird. We could also Fading Hope or Fiery Impulse one of our own creatures, but that doesn't seem that good. We obviously want both of our creatures in play, so Fading Hope them isn't a good shout. But yeah, just to get the third spell, we'll just Fiery Impulse in response, get another get another Surveil off the Chandler here. And then get back 2 Phoenixes, and like we should be so far ahead now. Okay, yeah, sweet, we got there, nice.